everyone. I'm Lori Nakama, one of the co-chairs for AMP, which is our ViacomCBS employee resource group focusing on Asian American media professionals. I hope everyone is doing well during these unusual and crazy times, but we are so happy that you're able to join us virtually. I would like to thank the Office of Global Inclusion and our production team for their patience and for finding a way to still allow us to host virtual events and celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It's really important, especially in these times, for us to know that everyone's here for each other for support and acknowledgement. I hope some of you were able to join us last week for our first event with Carrie Ann Inaba. If not, if you missed it, you can still catch it here on Workplace. Today, we are excited to bring you our second event, an exciting panel conversation on WashTheHate, addressing xenophobia during a pandemic. We would like to thank our colleagues at CBS News and also the Asian American Communications Agency, IW Group, for helping put this all together. Now I would like to introduce Elaine Quijano, today's moderator. Elaine is the anchor for the nightly politics show Red and Blue for CBSN, the CBS News 24-hour digital streaming network. She is also a correspondent for CBS News, contributing to all CBS News broadcast platforms. Elaine will get us started by talking about the WashTheHate campaign and introduce our panelists. Please welcome Elaine Quijano.
As lockdown orders begin lifting across the United States, the Asian American community is not only concerned about protecting themselves from exposure to COVID-19, but also their physical safety. Since the outbreak of the virus, self-reported hate incidents against persons of Asian descent have surged throughout the country, with reports of harassment, vandalism, and violent assaults. In March, the FBI assessed that hate crime incidents against Asian Americans would likely increase due to the spread of the virus and the assumption that certain individuals may associate COVID-19 with the Asian American community. One of the most high-profile campaigns to address and respond to this has been WashTheHate, a social media initiative created by Asian American Communications Agency, IW Group, to address COVID-related discrimination. The campaign invited the community to post short videos featuring themselves washing their hands while sharing a personal story of how the pandemic has affected their lives. The campaign was launched with a series of videos featuring a number of Asian American artists and public figures, including our panelists today. The campaign has since gone viral, reaching hundreds of millions globally and generated hundreds of user-generated videos from both the community and beyond. Everyone from the founders of Panda Express to the faculty at the University of Utah have gotten involved in the campaign to share their stories and build allyship with the Asian American community. Let's take a look at a short video.
Attacks against Asians have increased.
Parent attacks in New York City.
Just this week, 3 Asian Americans were stabbed.
The Asian American community is not only fighting to stay safe, but they're also fighting racism.
Acts of violence against Asian Americans will not stop the spread of this virus.
In my 40 years here in the U.S., I haven't seen this level of blatant attacks.
Times like this is not a time to be a racist or to discriminate.
It's not the Chinese virus, it's not the Kung flu.
Coronavirus affects all of us.
Blaming people doesn't get us anywhere.
Only you can do something about racism.
Remember, we need each other and wash away the hate.
Here to wash the hate.
Wash the hate.
Wash the hate.
Wash the hate. Wash the hate.
Wash the hate. Just like that.
And it is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Tzi Ma has acted on stage and on screen for more than 40 years. In his first 2 plays, FOB, that's Fresh Off the Boat, and The Dance and the Railroad, he worked with David Henry Hwang. He is known, Tzi is, according to his Twitter bio, as Hollywood's go-to Asian father. With us also is actress Haena Kim. Her long list of Hollywood roles includes playing Special Agent Emily Ryder on the CBS show FBI. Before that, she played opposite Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Kate on HBO's Ballers. And David Henry Hwang is a Tony Award-winning playwright and screenwriter, a prolific writer. His works include the plays M. Butterfly, Yellowface, and Chinglish, just to name a few. His latest show, Soft Power, opened in New York last October. Welcome, Ty, David, and Catherine. It is really great to have the chance to talk to you today. I know that we have a lot to cover, and I wanted to first hear a little bit about your personal backgrounds, starting with you, Catherine. I understand you were born and grew up in Queens, New York. Tell us about that.
Yes, I'm actually the first generation born here. My parents immigrated from Korea before I was born. My dad was an engineer in Korea. My mom worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they were selling umbrellas in Times Square and doing whatever they could, just had that hustler immigrant mentality.
And what was that like? I mean, you talk about sort of that mentality to, hustle, and New York City is such a place of those big American dreams. Tell us a little bit about how that affected you.
Yeah, I think I was really fortunate because my grandparents immigrated with my parents. And I think kind of what we're talking about now, right? How community is more important than ever. I was so fortunate when my parents were always working to have that, to have my aunt and uncle and all of my cousins around. It's why I know how to speak Korean. And that's the whole thing, right? Everyone comes here, whether it was 10 years ago, 100 years ago, longer, for that American dream. And I'm really grateful that my parents came and gave that opportunity to me and my brother.
Ty, let me turn to you. You are Hong Kong American. Your family settled on Staten Island. What was that like?
Staten Island actually was a pretty diverse community at the time, Unfortunately, we were only one of two Chinese families on the entire island. And we lived across the street from each other. So my parents ran a restaurant, obviously. Back in the day, there were only basically two occupations that's open to immigrant families. Restaurants one, laundries the other, and then the other family ran a laundry across the street. So that was kind of fun. I mean, I had a good time.
All right, and not to be outdone here, of course, representing the West Coast, David Henry Hwang. A lot of your work has examined identity in the Asian immigrant experience. Tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing.
Yeah, so I was born in Los Angeles, and I'm also the child of first-generation immigrants. My father was originally from Shanghai, and my mom was ethnic Chinese, but from the Philippines. And they both came over for college. So my mom came over to be a pianist. My dad eventually became a businessman, but they met at the University of Southern California at a foreign students dance on Valentine's Day.
Oh, that is so lovely. Very lovely. Well, the Philippines is a place I'm very familiar with. Just so folks who may not be aware, I am the daughter of immigrants from the Philippines, and very much delighted to take part in this conversation today. We each have very different reasons for wanting to get involved in this Wash the Hate campaign. And it starts with our experiences and the experiences of people close to us. And Catherine, I want to start with you because you have a close friend, I understand, who was recently involved or experienced a hate incident. Tell us what happened.
Right, and I think that's why it hits so close to home, because it's not like I'm reading about something about somebody in Midland, Texas or somewhere else. It was in downtown Los Angeles, outside the Whole Foods. She was standing on line, 6 feet away, doing the social distancing, and she had her earbuds in. And she started hearing a commotion behind her, and she didn't pay attention. She assumed it was probably somebody homeless, who knows. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you have two grown men who are in front of her, and they're screaming that she should die. And they're pointing their fingers to look like guns and poking her head with them. And she's also a native Angelino. She's Korean American. And the commotion she had heard behind her was actually a young mom and daughter who had been harassed by the two men. And the security from Whole Foods luckily came out to kind of intervene. And I'm just grateful it didn't escalate more. But to be honest, that incident just shook me so much because it is somebody that I know, very close to me. It's in my town where I live now, and it could have happened to anybody.
And David, as I was listening to Catherine speak, I'm thinking about how for you, there was a direct kind of incident in which I think maybe a lot of people also will be able to relate to, which is of a different kind of caliber, some might say, and yet still provokes the same kind of thought process of what is it exactly that is going on in the minds of some folks. Tell us what happened to you, because you had that incident take place. And what did you think at the time?
Yeah, so mine was, relatively minor, but this was like 2.5, 3 months ago, really, when the American public was first starting to become just aware of the virus. And I was in my doctor's office for a routine appointment, and another white patient yelled at me as I was going in, "Have you been to China in the last 14 days?" And then I went in for my appointment. Actually, my wife, who's not Asian, just sort of like got all over the guy. But I was also a little triggered because I had a much more serious attack a few years back where I got stabbed in the neck, and which may or may not have been a hate crime, but it just kind of brings to mind the degree to which we're all vulnerable, and you don't know when it's going to happen and when this sort of thing's going to pop out. And certainly it's much more prevalent now.
Ty, what about you? You were recently confronted yourself outside of a grocery store as well. Tell us what happened to you.
Well, it's the first time I've heard of David's story, so I'm sorry, David, you had to go through that. And hello, Catherine, we have never met. What's up with Whole Foods, man? I don't get it, because I was at Whole Foods too. So it was a native, the Whole Foods in Pasadena is where I live, and it's underground parking. So I drove down and parked my car, and I was ready to cross to the entrance, and there was a car pulling around the corner slowly, and he slowed down, and I thought he was going to let me pass and be courteous. However, he didn't stop. He rolled up in front of me and rolled down his window at the same time and looked at me straight in the eye and said, "You should be quarantined," and just took off. And this was also early on in the COVID-19 time, where I believe was a day after the charter flight coming in from Wuhan that was had a group of Americans that were quarantined at one of the Air Force bases. So this happened the day after that. And needless to say, you feel violated, and it's just recounting the story gets you really upset. So that's why, we need to be part of this Wash the Hate campaign.
I can't imagine, that, and it's always one of those instances too, when something is said, you think, what should have I said in that moment? What is it that, I didn't get to say that I would have liked to say? I'm just struck by how remarkably accomplished all of you are, and yet experiencing this, in this day and age in the United States of America. And now, as we said, we're seeing this resurgence as this pandemic continues to play out. I wonder, and this is for anyone to answer, how has this affected you? David, you talk about this assault that you had a couple of years ago. I mean, what profound kind of effects do you think that had on you and your sense of identity, something that you have really explored in your art?
Yeah, actually, I think, a little pathologically compartmentalized. So even when I talk about my stabbing, I'm like, I got stabbed. But, and I had to write about it in the show that you referred to, Soft Power, to really admit to myself that it might have been a hate crime. Because I think that what I realized is there's a part of me that would feel like ashamed if I was the victim of a hate crime, which is totally wrong. But I think that sometimes that's a feeling that people experience, that, you know, the people who should feel ashamed, of course, are the people who are doing the hating and doing the assaulting. And yet that's why it's important that we talk about this sort of incident too, so we realize it's not individual, it's not something I did, it's not like I could have been more, you know, American. These sort of things just happen because there's hate out there.
And what about words? You know, in Ty's case, Catherine, in the case of your friend, we're talking about not physical assaults here, but verbal assaults. And yet we know that words are painful and that they linger, sometimes forever. Ty, maybe I'll ask you, since you were directly confronted. When you look back on that now with a little bit of time, just a little bit of time, how are you processing that?
You know, physical, verbal, it's abuse no matter what. And throughout my life, I've been confronted with racism. So what do we do about it? You know, this has been a long history of anti-Asian American hate crimes. It's not the first time, it won't be the last. And we have to find some solutions. And I don't know what the solution is. I mean, I was on a panel about a month ago and some experts said, we're hardwired to do that. I mean, we will single out groups to pick on. So if that's the case, then what is the answer? And personally, one of the things that I think, you know, that I take to heart is this quote, you know, silence is, encourages the tormentor and never tormented, Elie Wiesel. And I think it's very powerful, you know, that we, you know, need to speak up. And I think it's happening because with this, you know, Wash the Hate campaign, we've gotten such a response that I think with all the participations, and I think it's the right direction that we should take. And that the more we talk about it, the more people get involved, you know, the more of the advocacy groups that we get involved with. I think it's really important that hate crime to one group is hate crime to every group. So I think we need to be aware of that. And the more we speak up, the more we speak out, I think it's better for all of us.
Yeah, as a journalist, I mean, I'm a firm believer in the idea that you can't fix something until you know that it's a problem. And unfortunately, a lot of folks don't realize, frankly, that this is even taking place. So it's so important that we're having this discussion. Catherine, what about you? You know, Ty talks about his experience as an actor throughout his career. Not just during the recent past, but all throughout his career, having experienced bias and discrimination. What's been your professional experience as an Asian American woman in Hollywood?
Right. Well, just to add on to what Ty and David were saying, I just, you know, it's exactly what they're saying, right? I think the important message is that we're not alone. So when you have this isolated event happen, you know, in an underground parking lot, or, you know, I'm not sure where you were, David, but I think it is important to talk about it because ignorance isn't bliss, right? It's, I think, very important to educate ourselves and other people, our neighborhoods, our schools, to report things, to talk about it. And I think there is a lot that we can do, actually. I think conversations like this today, there are huge political campaigns happening, right? Led by Congresswomen Judy Chu and Grace Meng, for instance. And even the Wash the Hate campaign that started out as a couple videos on Instagram has really taken over, and I think has been getting the message out that we're all human beings. And the point right now isn't to channel our fear into hating people. It's to figure out a cure and how to stay safe and healthy.
Oh, go ahead, Catherine.
No, please.
Well, so, you know, with that in mind, moving forward here, some folks would say there has been some progress made. Of course, others would say not enough progress in Hollywood when it comes to elevating the stories, right, of Asian Americans, people of color, AAPI community members. But I wonder if you think now that might be set back, Catherine, just a little bit because of the pandemic and the fact that we're all sort of in this state of suspended animation.
Right. I mean, I would like to think, no, I guess time will tell. It's interesting, actually, David, because years ago now, I worked on Chinglish in an acting class with a very, very famous, prominent acting teacher. And he didn't know what my Asian background was. He just gave me Chinglish. And it reminds me of so many auditions that I get as an Asian American woman. I got one the other day because video games are still going. So I was asked if I could learn 6 pages of Thai and a Thai accent in 2 days for an audition. And T, I see you laughing because I'm sure you get the same thing. I'm Korean American. I'm pretty sure, with the way things were with war, I may be other Asian descent. But that's the language that I know. So asking me to learn Thai in 2 days, or Chinese, or any other language for that matter, is the same as asking me to learn Russian in 2 days. I can try my best as an educated person. I mean, is it gonna be perfect? Absolutely not. But it's definitely something that drives me crazy.
I mean, David, what do you think?
Yeah.
Listening to that kind of story, given your body of work and the actors that you've worked with over the course of your career, does that sound familiar?
Yeah, and I just want to say, Catherine, there's a bunch of other plays of mine that I think I would love to see you in. But Chinglish probably, that's not it. Look, we've gotten to a point, I think, where Hollywood as a business has started to realize that, despite everything that's happened over the past couple of years, that people of color are going to be the majority of the audience in maybe by 2040. And we have this international audience. And if you accept the premise that people like to see themselves on stages and screens, then it's just a better business model to have diverse bodies and diverse stories on those stages and screens. As the journalist Jeff Yang says, racism is no longer a viable business model. And I think that the economics of that are probably going to be compelling even after we get to start going outside again.
David, I wonder, do you think within this construct that we're in right now, which is still evolving amidst this pandemic, of how we are all rethinking how we work, that there may be a chance to get to tables that maybe people in the AAPI community couldn't necessarily have gotten to in the past? And, not to sound sort of opportunistic, but is there a rethinking or an opportunity to rethink how this particular art, how playwriting, how acting, how directing, how those positions are assigned and how access is granted?
So, I mean, I teach playwriting also. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, at least in terms of theater, if the literary department, if the dramaturgs haven't been furloughed, what they're doing right now is reading scripts and meeting with people on Zoom. And so there are opportunities in this moment. And I also think it's really important, and this is true not only in Hollywood, but just generally, that we ally with other groups of color because we're all really about changing the industry in the same way. And we're all subject to racism. And so it's better if we're able to come together in that regard.
Ty, what do you think? The longevity of your career, 40 plus years as an actor on screen and stage. How is it professionally that you are coping with what we're all dealing with right now, this pandemic?
Well, the pandemic has put a full stop on everything. There isn't a production that's going on. So we're all basically unemployed. And the only people who are working are the writers. I know writers' rooms are happening. And I was in the middle of shooting a pilot for CW, a reboot of Kung Fu, which I think you guys would be happy on the turn of events, the reboot of a 70s TV show who happens to have David Carradine as the leading, actor. And in our show, it's going to be Olivia Liang, who's going to be an Asian American woman who's going to be in the lead. And so these are the changes that's happening. And I think not only for Asian Americans, obviously for Asian American, and women of color, I think they just need the opportunity. It has nothing to do with talent, has nothing to do with, whether or not they can do or not cannot do. It's just that they need the opportunity to do it. And our showrunner is, Asian American woman, showrunner for Christina Kim. So I think I see the progress, and I think David's right that, if it's in a free market economy, you're talking about, really that is the better business model, because, our market is saturated. So you need to go global, and for the global audience, I think it's much more inviting if you see people of color in the show. And that's already been proven, there's data on it. And also even, with ourselves, according to the latest Nielsen report, that Asian Americans are really the top consumers in terms of films and media. So I think, it behooves the studios to really think about that, because it's good business.
Catherine, let me ask you about just your own professional experience. How has this pandemic affected your work and the productions you're involved in?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually in the middle of shooting my show as this was happening. So it was very interesting because, all of a sudden you think about the little things, right, that you don't think about before. Like, Ty, you know what it's like when you're on set and you have hair and makeup people touching you up all the time. So it does make me think, how can we be in a room again and feel safe for somebody to be literally just up in your grill the entire day, all day, fidgeting with your clothes, your hair, your makeup. They had, even at craft services, everything was now pre-packaged, right? Camera people had gloves on all of a sudden. All of the props I used were sanitized probably 3 times over, at least, before I even got them. So it is a very interesting thing. And it was tricky because we changed our shot list the night before. I got a call at 11 p.m. from my first AD. And I was told that we were going to do some reshoots just to make sure we had the next episode ready to go. And that morning when we all showed up, we were told that it was going to be the last day of shooting, that we were done for the rest of the season. And we finished probably about 3.5 episodes early. And at the time, I was still guest starring and being flown to New York to shoot. And so they needed me out of the apartment that night, which was crazy. And luckily we were able to figure it out so that I could have the weekend. But I think it's one of those things where I think a lot of us started talking about, being a little bit more careful about washing our hands, being a little bit safer. And then all of a sudden we realized we weren't taking it as seriously as we should. And it's almost like everything just kind of shut down abruptly.
And so, David, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. When we look more broadly at this issue of anti-Asian American sentiment, you talked about having allies outside the AAPI community and the importance of that. Are there any other sort of tangible steps that you can think of, or any strategies that have been effective, right, in expanding the conversation beyond just the bounds of the community affected, in this case, the AAPI community?
I mean, I certainly think that there are organizations that pull together people of color, both culturally and artistically and in the entertainment world and politically. There's a number of different sort of strategies in that arena, but it's important to realize that, one of the things this teaches us is like the failure of model minorityism. This whole idea that, we were like people who sort of adhered to the model minority stereotype and believed that it would somehow protect us, you see how that just shifts on a dime. And whenever there's a reason to go, oh no, they're still foreign, they're not really American, we be just as racist to associate African Americans with, say, Ebola. And therefore, it's important that we not placate racism, but that we ally with other people of color who also are experiencing that, and through a number of different cultural and political organizations.
And to piggyback on that, really, I'm telling you, we have a history of unity among all the communities of people of color, because we live in the same community. That's not the only place we can live. So there is connection. It's just that in time, some of us forget that we believe in this divide and conquer myth, of pitting ourselves, as the quote unquote model minority against other minorities. And I think through time, we've seen through that. And we need to get back to that again. That, it's the Rainbow Coalition that we need. Because ultimately, who's getting hurt in this time is the people of color who is really being hurt by this pandemic. People of color overwhelmingly, have suffered the consequences in terms of death, in terms of losing of jobs. And we sympathize, we empathize, and we have to be together.
Tzi, I want to ask you the same question I asked David a moment ago, and that is, are there specific strategies in your experience that have worked? Have you been in certain situations where you've been met very directly in a professional setting with bias or discrimination? How did you handle it? What did you say? What is it you wish you would have said?
Don't be silent. I am never one of those silent types, so I will speak up regardless of what it is. Sometimes I'm more articulate than other times. Sometimes it works better than others, but nonetheless, you still have to speak up. We don't know what the result is. We can never predict what that is. However, we have to hold that one principle in mind, is silence is not a good thing to have. I mean, even if we have to pay the consequences in one way or the other, and I have paid consequences, losing jobs, getting beat up, those things are part of it. Getting physically abused in one way or the other, I have to deal with it. But you know what? I accept the responsibility, and you're not going to shut me up.
And I want to just to add on to that, I think a lot of us have experienced racism as a bystander. And I think even if you're on a Zoom call, let's say with your team, and somebody says something, I think it's really important just to call them out. And of course, I don't know if I advocate getting beaten up, but maybe I'm not as tough as Tzi, I don't know.
Last resort. I mean, it does happen. What are you going to do?
No, it absolutely does. Absolutely does. But I think as long as you can keep yourself safe, I think going back to, we are stronger together, not divided, right? I think it is important to stand up for our fellow human beings, and even just to say, hey, that's racist, or leave them alone. Something as simple as that can go such a long way. And I think if for whatever reason that doesn't even seem plausible in the situation, I think as human beings, isn't our greatest need to feel seen and acknowledged, right? I think it's important to check in on that person and just literally ask, are you okay? Because like David was saying before, there is something odd, like it almost feels embarrassing, right? To be singled out in some sort of way, especially for the way that we look. And it shouldn't feel that way. And I think it starts with other people also making you feel included.
Catherine, I wonder though, for folks who are listening and watching and are wondering, okay, I'm not Tzi. I don't think I could get beat up, and I don't think that that's something that would necessarily work for me. But, Catherine, I'm curious because, as a woman, right, there's also a different dynamic as an Asian American woman. How do you sort of navigate that kind of dynamic where there is a need, sometimes to speak up, and yet there is a different set of criteria that women are judged upon, right? And it's different for an Asian American man than it would be for an Asian American woman.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I feel like that's a life lesson I'll probably learn forever. I think it's remembering who you are in this world and knowing that you can stand up for yourself and still keep composure and grace.
Yeah.
When I learn to do it better, and I hopefully will as the years go on, I will share those notes with you. But
I mean, David, is that something that you've seen? Have you seen sort of a different set of criteria when it comes to within the AAPI community, the different ways in which women are treated versus men?
I mean, I think that's certainly true. The intersection of gender issues and racial issues, you see it in a number of different settings, including within the AAPI community. I mean, I remember many decades ago, at the beginning of the Asian American movement, I mean, number one, it's important to remember that it kind of came out of the Black Power movement. And so there has always been what we at that point called sort of third world unity historically. But also, to your particular question, there's this moment when it's like, well, okay, there's sexism and there's racism, and we have to deal with racism first, and then we'll deal with sexism later. You know, this is what like guys basically were saying in the 70s. And so that distinction is spurious and turned out to be wrong. And it's really now, I think, what we call intersectionality. We have to realize all these issues are interrelated and we have to fight them all together, and then we don't prioritize one over the other.
Ty, I want to ask you about the power structure that you've seen perhaps evolve, change in Hollywood over the course of your career. So when you first started out, and I mentioned the 2 plays in which you worked with a certain David Henry Hwang, but the difference in then and now, is there one? If so, is it better? Is it worse? Is it the same? What's been your observation with respect to representation and particularly the AAPI community?
There's definitely progress. There's no doubt. And I think it's because they recognized it's good business. You know, I'm not sure whether or not it's a noble, you know, endeavor for them to do what they do. I think really there has been progress, obviously. I mean, if I look at what's happening in the last 2 years, with myself, I work with 4 Asian American women writer-directors, back to back to back to back. And the last time I did that was 2006. That was Red Doors with Georgia Lee. And starting in 2017, I started working with Asian American women writer-directors. And so what does that tell me? It tells me finally that they gotten the opportunity to do it. Because I know they were always talented. It just had never had the opportunity to do it. So that's progress. And I see that, you know, there are more writers in the writer's room. And I think David can attest to that. And I think there are more showrunners of Asian American descent. And that's really important as well, because you're calling the shots. And also directors who are directing just episodic television, where I just spoke to Mina Shum, who is a Canadian Asian director who's been directing some television. And she said, what's really great is that she gets to cast people, you know, in that setting where she calls the shots, and she can cast people of color in those roles. So I think more and more you will see that. And I think because you can get away with less today, you can't just go and do like research going to Blockbuster and give you this kind of chop suey thing of who Asians or Asian Americans are. Now you're kind of, you know, you can go to Google. There is really no excuse to do something that is stereotypical. There is really no excuse for anyone to do something that is offensive, unless it's purposely done so, you know, for something. And I think ultimately at this point, there's really no looking back. I think we just need to look forward, and I think we're in a very good place in a lot of ways. I think we're finally taking hold. We're finally on solid ground to propel us into the next level, which is more inclusion, more diversity, and more quantity, because not quality is not enough. We need more projects. We need quantity, because we're not a singular voice. We have many voices in our community, and they all need to be represented.
Ty, is it clear how this pandemic is going to affect that progress?
No, it's not. This is definitely a monkey wrench in one way or the other. And I think, hopefully we will recover quickly, and the shows that are coming that involves us have some kind of a welcoming mat, that the people around the globe is saying that we want this kind of content. We want these different voices. We want these different stories, and we're seeing it play out in a very interesting way. You have Tiger Tail, you have The Farewell, you have Parasite, all of these wonderful different stories. You have Soft Power on Stage, which I hope it's going to go to Broadway, because it's a fantastic play, and it deserves that kind of attention. So as long as we keep on moving forward that way and encourage, people like our kids, encourage them. If you find that your children have the kind of knack or desire to get into writing, get into directing, get into producing, get into acting, let them try. Let them have a chance to do it, instead of, really locking into these traditional, try and true, you need to be a doctor, you need to be a lawyer, you need to be an accountant. And I think it's about really giving the opportunity for children to explore whether or not they have the talent to do what we're doing. And also what we do is important, because it really, we have an opportunity to change millions of minds at one time. So that's what we're talking about. It's the fact that we have that kind of reach. We have that opportunity. So our profession is noble. So have your kids get into it.
Catherine, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think also, I think it's such a beautiful thing to tell stories that have never been told before. And I think that's really what we're seeing with movies like yours, like Tiger Tail and plays like yours, David. I think that's the important thing, just so that, I think when you're little, you want to see people like you on screen, on stage, out there. And I think it's just important to focus more on that and creating more of that content like we've been doing, and move forward with that. And just to clarify what I was saying earlier, I'm not saying that I can't play a Chinese woman if you gave me enough time and a dialect coach, and because I would obviously want to do it right? It's just, when they just assume that you can do something in a couple days because it's probably close enough to what, that's when it drives me crazy. But I just wanted to clarify that.
We totally understand. We understand. David, let me ask you about what you think this moment in time might generate with respect to art. These experiences that we've been hearing about, that you all talked about off the top, of discrimination, of bias. These are sources of pain. These are emotions that are raw. What do you think might actually come in terms of works, projects, art? It seems like there could be potentially a wave of projects coming out as a result of what is a really awful thing, and that is the continued bias in this country.
Again, of course, nobody knows what's going to happen, and there is a sort of a dark vision of where this could all go as well. But the hopeful vision is that this helps us to realize things like, hey, we are all interconnected. This virus is not confined to a particular ethnic group, a particular community, a particular nation. The whole world is going through this at once. And to appreciate that and to cherish our interdependence, I think would be a great result, as well as being aware of who are really the important people in this society. who's keeping us alive right now, and learn to value those individuals and those professions, as well as fostering in general something that the arts are uniquely equipped to convey, which is empathy. If we can come out of this process and create works which connect us more and which express that empathy, then that will have been a good silver lining for all the tragedy that we're experiencing now.
Ty, what do you think? I mean, even given the level of vitriol that we've seen that you experienced yourself, is there a potential here for more empathy?
Absolutely. I think, forget the potential. We need to go there. We need to continue to nourish that. We need to continue to encourage that. And more inclusion, the better. That was the world I was, brought up in. It was so diverse. It was so exciting. The time of the 60s, of all of this exploration, of getting it together. And I think we need to rekindle that. I think we've kind of, in the middle of all of this stuff, we lost our way a little bit, how closely we are together. And I think I really don't think we can go back. I'm very optimistic about that, because I don't think it's acceptable for us to go back. So really, I think I look at all the efforts, particularly with you guys who are the journalists, who are the vanguards of the free press. You guys are at the front lines too, because you're telling the public what truth is. And the kind of abuse you guys get from doing that is ridiculous, but you know what? You guys fight on. I don't see you guys backing up. I don't see you guys say, I'm going to throw up my hands and say, we can't take it. Yes, we can. And we're not going to give up on in terms of, where we are and where we're going. And I think that is a really encouraging sign.
Well, as a journalist, we certainly don't plan on stopping the tough questions anytime soon. I can assure you of that.
That's right.
Catherine, what about you? I know we have to wrap up soon to leave time for some audience questions, but what is your feeling moving forward here out of this vitriol that your friend experienced directly that, raises such raw emotions in folks to hear stories like that? Is there a potential here? Is there an opportunity to kind of come out of this better as a society?
Gosh, absolutely. I mean, I think it also just starts at home, right? It made me think a lot about my mom and what her experiences must have been like when she immigrated here. And so it's opened up an entire dialogue of just, it's like we need to still stay connected, even though we can't physically be together all the time. And so I asked my mom on a weekly basis to tell me stories from her childhood that I've never heard before. I've also just been watching an embarrassing amount of Korean dramas. It is so embarrassing. Like, people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, I cannot talk to you right now. I'm watching Crash Landing on You. But I think it's to stay connected to our people. And I think when you kind of take away all of the distractions that we normally are privy to, it leaves us with each other. And I think it lends itself to a beautiful opportunity to just get closer to our communities. And
on that note, as I said, I know our time is running short here, so I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to get any questions in from people who may be watching. So I'll turn things over to Gail. Gail, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Elaine, and thank you to our panelists, Catherine, Ty, David, for sharing your experiences. And thank you to IW Group, too, for starting such an important movement. I'm Gail Gaviola, one of the co-chairs of AMP in New York, and I'll be helping ask a few employee questions that have come in. So just a quick reminder, employees can still submit questions by commenting on the workplace stream or emailing globalinclusion@viacbs.com. So with that, we'll kick it off with our first question. It's from Victoria on Workplace. My question is about mental health and the disparities between generations. Are you able to recognize how our experiences as Asians in America can affect our mental health without the support of our parents? My mother does not believe in therapy or meds. Often like a Korean drama, she would threaten to disappear or somehow no longer live because of my actions/behavior. She grew up during the Korean War and has never dealt with her own mental health. Is this something you can relate to, and how do you deal with mental health now? How is it affecting you in this environment? Maybe we can start off with you, Catherine. And anyone can jump in as well.
I mean, and I'm realizing it's not even just a cultural thing, right? I think it's also a generational thing, because I think the generation before us didn't go to therapy. They didn't talk about stuff. And I think it's so important to emphasize interpersonal skills and relationships. And it just starts with a simple conversation, I think.
Get professional help. It's really good. Because I mean, friends are friends. I mean, you can talk to your friends for so much, really, because they're not professionals. I go to therapy. I love it. It helps me a lot. So, you know, just to the questioner, I think, you know, we have to try to get over that stigma.
I totally agree with that. I mean, my dad actually, unfortunately, passed away suddenly last year, and I realized that
Sorry.
And so I started going to therapy, and it's been such a game changer for me, just to talk about stuff with an outsider who has no, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I've done so much therapy in my life. I mean, I did couch therapy. You know, I did analysis where you sort of go and lie on the couch. But, you know, as it relates to our parents' generation, even actually, Ty and I might actually be about Catherine's parents' generation age.
That's right. I think so.
But it also has to do, therefore, with sort of when your parents immigrated. And it's not something that happens as much in the root culture Asian countries. And of course, look, there's a lot of things we do as first generation Americans that our parents are not that crazy about. This has to, you know, I think this is one of them. And also, if it ends up in the long run improving one's relationship with one's parents, then they might decide they like it.
Yeah, thank you all. And it's timely too. It's Mental Health Awareness Month as well. So it's good we're having this conversation. Our second question is coming from Anna over Facebook Workplace. And this was touched on a little bit, but can you talk about more how you amplify the message and reach those who need to be reached when it comes to Wash the Hate? I feel like the folks who participate or attend these conversations are the people who are aware and curious.
I wish I wasn't in this position to have to do that. I mean, I wish I can speak, you know, through my art as opposed to speaking, you know, as a panelist, you know. But nonetheless, we have to do it. That's our responsibility, you know. I think what we're doing is that we're taking the lead because we're the one who's been tormented. So we know firsthand what that feels like. So we will take the lead. We will be happy to take the lead, but you need to come along.
And I think we do approach it through our art. Yeah. I mean, it's easier if you're a writer because you're sort of creating the story. So I've certainly incorporated my stabbing into, as I said, my musical. But we try to reach people however we can. And it may be through our work. It can be through panels like this. It can be through videos that go viral. It can be talking to people on the street.
Right, and maybe, you know, people who are initially interested in this conversation are the people who are attending, but I encourage you to pass on that torch and have the conversation with your coworkers after this hour, you know, with your family, with your friends, and I think it just has that trickle down effect because of that.
Communicate.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah. Thank you all. I think we have time for 2 more questions. We have another one from Victoria. How do you deal with microaggression, especially with people you have relationships with? Even during this pandemic, we see so many comments on social media that allude to racist, quote unquote, jokes. I've been coined the angry Asian because I can no longer overlook even the minor microaggressions with friends, family, and coworkers. So how do you handle any microaggressions you might witness?
That's a tough one. I tell you, I think, you know, it is a conversation. You really need to have a conversation with those people, you know, who are doing that. And first of all, I don't think you can let them get away with it. Happens all the time. They think it's funny, and it's a lot of it's subconscious. You know, they don't even think about the consequences. I think what we need to do really is to point out the fact that, you know, before you speak, think about what you're going to say. Be a little more thoughtful, you know, about what you're going to say and how it's going to affect the person that's listening to you. And ultimately, it's about cooperation and communication.
So I'm going to make an old guy comment, which is it probably is better to have those conversations not on social media.
Yes, yes, yes. Agree.
Right. It's because it's the same thing with texting, right? It like everything gets lost in translation when you don't actually get to look somebody in their eyes or hear their voice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so true. Thank you all. So we'll wrap with this one last question. It's from Eli. It's a bit lighter. What is the first place, so it could be a restaurant, a small business, Asian or not, that you are looking forward to visiting when we make it past quarantine? And let's start with you, Elaine. You've been moderating. Yeah.
Oh, what am I looking at? Gosh, I just want to hug people. I just want to hug all the folks that come on the show, because normally for Red and Blue, for instance, we're at the desk in the broadcast center where we will have folks via satellite, but there are also folks in studio a lot of times. And in those minutes before we go on during a commercial break, it's a chance to kind of say, hi, how are you? And catch up a little bit. I used to take those moments for granted, but I never, ever will again, because I don't have that opportunity now. And even if it's just a quick 2 seconds before we get to go on, I have such a deep and abiding respect for so many of my colleagues, and it is such a treat to be able to see them in person before we do our segments. And so I think for myself, that's the first thing. I'm kind of a hugger anyway, so look out, everybody. When we're back, you're in for some hugs.
I would love to take all of you down to Chinatown, New York, because, you know, we're taking a hit down there. So once we're able, we take Catherine, David, Elaine, we go down to Chinatown, we go to Hong Kong Cafe, have that steamed fish, and hang out and talk about what we're going to do next. You know, adapting David's play into films. I mean, you know, really, that's what I want to do. Can't wait.
I guess, because as I said earlier, I teach, I'm really looking forward to getting back into a classroom with my students, because I'm really tired of being on Zoom.
No.
Yeah. I was shooting all winter in New York in like 3-degree wind chill with like covered in body warmers. And I was just really looking forward to traveling somewhere warm and hiking. I was really looking forward to going to Patagonia and exploring Argentina. So I would really love to do that. Just get back to the normal things, right? That we probably just took for granted.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you so much for being here and for taking time to answer some of our employee questions. And I'll kick it back to you, Elaine.
All right, Gail, thank you. I want to thank all of you for making the time to join us today. Thanks to our panelists for sharing their stories, Catherine, David, and Ty. Thanks to the Office of Global Inclusion, along with our employee resource group, AMP, Asian American Media Professionals. And of course, thanks to all of you watching for taking the time to listen to our conversation and to keep this conversation going. We encourage you to post your own videos to social media with the hashtag #WashTheHate. As we've said, these are not easy subjects to talk about, but the fact that we are all able to give voice to these concerns and to be heard, I think, is reason for hope. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.